You know, I'd like to start out with the ridiculous stuff that Hillary Clinton's been saying this week, but I have to say that when the Israeli government does really stupid things, like bribe each other with pet projects, it just makes them look ridiculous when it comes to other issues like the military. For example, Bibi Netanyahu is now prime minister. Well, it turns out that Bibi promised Shas, which is the largest ultra-Orthodox party in Israel, consisting of, I believe, 11 seats in this government, something like 2 billion shekels worth of pet project funds. It's all alleged at this point, but the fact is that Shas has had a corrupt leader before. His name was Derry. He spent years in prison, and at this point is still not allowed to be in public office, although he actually tried to run for mayor before the court allowed him. But all of that comes down to Livni supposedly was ganged up against by Likud, which is Bibi Netanyahu's group, and Shas, the ultra-right. That means that we once again have a corrupt government. I thought that's why we just had elections, so that we could get rid of Olmert, who was obviously corrupt and is still under investigation, and we just voted in like another corrupt government. Is there something wrong with the way this thing works? So what happens when you set up a government where you have to appease these little political parties and their pet projects? You basically can't do anything without bribing each other, which leads to corruption. But back to Clinton. She comes over on her first trip and basically declares, we're going to have a state called Palestine, Jerusalem's going to be its capital, and you will like it. Okay, that's going to work really well for about 30 seconds, and then what? The way the new government in America has been going at some things kind of reminds me of when my kids build towers out of blocks, and they build it really fast and really tall, and they call me and they're really quick, and they're like, look, 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 you got to see this, it's tall, it's beautiful, it's strong, I made it myself. And then like 3 seconds later, it all comes toppling down. So she wants a Palestinian state. She wants Jerusalem to be its capital, and I guess our capital is going to be like Eilat or something. But you know, one thing I was thinking, if Palestine becomes a country for the first time in history, and Jerusalem becomes its capital, then won't Jesus have to get like a passport when he lands on the Mount of Olives to get back into Israel? You think they'll let him in? But something else she said I found amusing was that Israel was tearing down 80 houses that belonged to Arabs, and that was very unhelpful, quote unquote, because somehow Israel agreed to it in the roadmap. So A, Israel did not agree to that in the roadmap. And B, does that mean that Arabs can just build houses wherever they want to? Because the reason they were torn down was because they were built without permits. And I actually, when I was growing up in Tel Aviv, witnessed Israeli authorities tearing down houses of Jews that built houses without permits. So Israeli Jews can't build houses without permits, or they get them bulldozed. But Arabs, they can just build houses wherever they want because, well, Jerusalem's going to be their capital, right? They're just poor, poor people. And then on top of that, she was somehow upset that Israel was building houses in Jerusalem, exercising quote-unquote sovereignty over Jerusalem. Is this like the Twilight Zone? Sovereignty over Jerusalem? Do we ask like America if they're building houses in like Maine or something? You're exercising sovereignty over Maine. We don't recognize Maine as being a state of America. Who asked you? One thing maybe some of you should realize is Israel is really not that big of a country, and there's not a whole lot of places to build new houses. So every time we build houses and someone throws a fit, you have to realize it's like, where do they want us to build? In the middle of the desert where there's no water or anything? But really, the problem with what Hillary Clinton is doing is she's coming over here and looking at the symptom, the land. There's land, a land. They need a country. They need a country, without dealing with the fact these people need a real heart change to interact with the world, not just Israel. They can't just raise their kids in hate and feel like their destiny is somehow the destruction of Israel and then eventually the Western world, and somehow Islam takes over and they all go live with Allah in heaven or something. They have to realize that in order to exist in a civilized world, you have to be able to interact peacefully with people who are different than you. And that, seriously, is going to take like a generation, because the kids that they have right now have already been trained otherwise. So while I appreciate the ambition of this current government in America and wanting to get all the world's problems solved in the first 100 days, there are some things that probably need to be dealt with on a deeper level. On another subject, there's been a lot of countries who've been cutting ties with Israel since the war in Gaza, namely some country I can't even pronounce, but it starts with an M, and it sounds like marijuana, and it must have been what they were smoking the whole time, because like 2 months later now, they're like, yeah, we're cutting ties with you too, because the Gaza conflict. They just kicked out their Israeli ambassador and all their staff on 48 hours notice. Can you feel the love spreading? So interestingly enough, America has never had a president that wanted to push the Palestinian two-state solution more than Barack Obama, and Israel could not have voted in a prime minister who was more against the idea. And then our Purim present from our friendly Arabs in East Jerusalem was a tractor attack. Another guy had a tractor going down the highway, rams a police car, flips it over, and squishes it into a bus. Israelis quickly reacted. They shot the guy dead, and the family of the guy are like, oh, it was an accident. I mean, of course, he was just such a nice guy. He would just go to work and come back, and he had kids, and he just was a hard worker. And it's like, have you seen the footage of this thing? Do you accidentally, like when you're driving a tractor, do you accidentally flip over cars and squish them into buses? Yeah. Very convincing. But on a lighter note, Iran apparently has everything it needs to make the A-bomb. So the government's been building a huge bunker that's supposed to be somehow underneath the new prime minister's home to the tune of 650 million shekels. So that should tell me that maybe they're a little concerned. So all I need to know now is, can my bomb shelter withstand a nuke?